to go whenever you guys. All right, welcome. My name is Taylor. I'm with Equal Ground Community Gardens. I'm going to speak about the organization towards the end of the presentation because I want to give us lots of time to talk about some of the garden prep that we can be doing now for the winter. Obviously, it's quite warm outside, so just imagine that it's a chilly 10 degrees out, and we're going to dive right in today. So I would like to speak with you today about kind of the steps, how we're going to move through the garden to prepare it for winter. So we're going to talk about harvesting and seed saving. We'll talk about the actual action of cleaning up the garden and what we can do with our leaves. We'll talk about fertilizing and some winter sowing as we kind of think about gardens for 2024. And we'll also talk about inventory and planning for next year. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to speak on who Equal Ground is, what we do, and how you can get involved. Let's dive in. So the first thing that we're actually going to do is we're going to harvest the rest of our garden. I know when I look outside into my garden right now, I can see that my tomatoes have been hit with blight, but I can still see some beautiful red gems on there. So I'm going to go out, I'm going to pull those tomatoes off. In the last 2 weeks, my peppers have put out a ton of new peppers. I'm going to go remove those and maybe make some salsa. I'm going to pull off any beans that I have available. Any tender flowers that I want to be able to bring in and put on display. I'm looking at a beautiful bouquet in front of me right now on my table. So anything that's frost sensitive, when that first frost comes through, it's going to take the plants out. You can go out and actually start removing all of the food that's remaining on those plants now before that frost hits. Once that frost hits, the quality of that food actually decreases significantly. So especially with this warm week we're having, I highly suggest getting out there and removing what you can. We do have some frost-resistant plants likely, any greens really, lettuce, kale, broccoli, cabbage, radish are just some, but there's lots out there. Those are plants where if a frost does come through, it's not the end of the world. The plant's likely going to survive. If you're really lucky, you might actually be out there harvesting kale in the middle of winter. That's not unknown. So those frost-resistant plants, you can leave if you choose and continue to harvest from them as long as you can. When that frost comes through, you may notice a little bit of downgrade in the quality of the food, but it's still edible. So you can choose to leave those frost-resistant plants. We have our perennials that are likely in the garden, and I know I'm speaking specifically to vegetables right now, but this includes any perennials that you have: sage, lavender, chives, raspberries, strawberries, rhubarb. You can go out and you can remove any of the edibles from those plants now as well, because for a lot of them, when the frost comes through, they're going to start to go into dormancy. And we'll also talk about what we can do with those perennials in a little bit. But for the actual food, we can remove that now as well. We also have some plants out there that may be biennial, and this means that their life cycle happens over 2 years. So typically the first year it's going to give you food, and then the second year it may give you a little bit of food, but in spring and early summer it typically is going to go to seed. We're going to talk about seed saving a little bit in a second, but if you're wanting to collect seed from any of these plants or wanting to get some of those early tender vegetables early spring from these plants, you can consider leaving the biennials in your garden as well. Parsley, kale, Brussels sprouts, celery, and there's a few others as well. And then, of course, we're going to talk about seed saving in a second, but I love seed saving in with harvesting. So yeah, the first thing that we're going to do, the first action, is get out there, remove any of the food that you can before the frost hits. So let's quickly talk about seed saving. I mean, I could do a whole presentation and then some on seed saving. It's something that I love to do. It's very addicting. It's very fun. And to me, it's just as fun as actually harvesting the plants. So I'm going to touch on it a little bit, but understand that seed saving itself is a big can of worms. So there's tons of information, but I'll give you some basics. If you're planning to do seed saving and you've never done it before, my advice to you is just start somewhere. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. There's going to be seeds that don't grow, and that's okay. But just for some information, we have typically 3 types of seeds, 2 that we focus on saving. Heirloom seeds are seeds where their roots go back 50+ years, and the type of seed, the type of fruit that it produces has not changed. So this is a plant that the tomato, it grew in 1940, and the tomato it grows today in 2023 or in 2024. The tomato is the exact same. There has been no cross-pollination. It has consistently been the same the whole time. These types of seeds are treasured. And if you're purchasing seed packets from, Vessey's or William Dam or even Mackenzie, it's going to tell you if the seed is an heirloom. And because the quality is consistent, these are the best seeds to grow and the best seeds to actually save. So if you're planning on getting into seed saving, you want to focus on heirloom seeds. Hybrid seeds are what most of us actually grow and is what typically is planted in farmers' fields. Hybrid seeds mean that they've been genetically modified to produce certain traits. This doesn't necessarily mean it's somebody in a lab coat and in a laboratory playing around with the genetics. It may just mean that they found a tomato plant. They really love how tall the tomato plant got and how resistant it was to disease. And then there's another tomato plant where they really like the fruit on it. So they're going to cross-pollinate these tomato plants to produce, a tomato plant with the desired traits that they like. The issue with saving seeds from that hybrid plant, so now we have this baby plant. If we save seeds from those tomatoes, the plant that grows isn't necessarily going to be the exact same plant that we just saved it from. It's going to default to one of the parents. So I still choose to save seeds from hybrid plants because at the end of the day, I'm just growing food. I don't, I'm not super interested in preserving genetics. But if you are, if you like a very specific type of tomato, if you save those seeds, you may not necessarily get the same plant. So typically when we purchase our seed packets, if it doesn't say heirloom, it's a hybrid. Or if it has an F at the front of the name, it's a hybrid. And then we also have open pollinated seeds. We typically lump this in with the heirloom, the organic, and this just means that the people who produced the seeds, they planted them and they let the pollinators do their thing. But in terms of seed saving, we mostly focus on heirloom and hybrid. And again, heirloom is the one that you want to save from. Best seeds to save. So when you're choosing to save seeds or you're planning to, ask yourself these 4 questions. What are you going to eat? I've determined this year I'm not growing zucchini anymore. I don't like zucchini. It takes up a ton of room. It produces way too much and it just goes bad in my fridge. I'm not growing zucchini. So I'm not going to save zucchini seeds. So first question, don't save seeds from a plant that you didn't enjoy. Do you have to sacrifice the crop? So some of our plants, the way that they produce seed is we actually have to, like zucchini, we have to sacrifice the fruit in order to get the seed. So pretty much all of our greens are like this. We let the greens bolt and they put on these long stalks. We don't eat the leaf when it turns into seed. So lettuce, kale, broccoli, calendula, beans. Of course, beans, we let them get bigger on the vine and they ripen. We're not going to eat those beans, but you can save them for seeds. Cucumbers, zucchini. It's not like a tomato where you can scoop out the insides and then still eat the tomato. A lot of these plants specifically are sacrificing the crop. And then are they sterile? Now this is not very common, but if you choose to save seeds from the grocery store from your peppers, you may actually not get anything. It likely won't grow. Sometimes seed producers do genetically modify their seeds to be like they'll grow the fruit and then you save the seed and that seed's actually sterile. This is terrible. It's a terrible practice. It's actually illegal in North America. This is a big issue in developing countries where it requires farmers to continuously purchase seed instead of being able to save it. So a lot of the stuff that you purchase in the grocery stores, like I said, it is illegal here, but it still happens. So, I do get people saying, oh, I tried to save pepper seeds and they didn't grow. It's because they're sterile. I actually grew loofah this year and I'm pretty sure they're sterile, likely not on purpose, but I cannot get any flowers to pop up so anything can pollinate. So I think that my loofah is actually sterile this year. And then the last question, which we just talked about, are they hybrid or heirloom? So if you're wanting to preserve a specific type of fruit for its qualities, just understand that if it's a hybrid, you're likely not going to get the same fruit again. So these are just things to think about. The actual process of saving seed, there's 2 kinds. Every single plant is different. I wish I could go over a bunch of plants with you guys today, but we just don't have time. But for any seed that's wet, it's coming from a tomato, a cucumber, a zucchini, or a pepper, you actually have to ferment the seeds before you save them. So you're going to scoop out those tomato guts into a glass. You're going to fill that glass with a bit of water, and you're going to let that sit for 24 to 72 hours until it gets stinky and bubbly and gross. You can then rinse off the seed and you can dry it. What happens is that tomato has a protective coating, or the tomato seed has a protective coating on it that traps moisture, and it stops the seed from being able to do anything within the actual tomato plant. If we don't remove that coating, that seed is actually going to go bad because it has no way to dry out because of that protective coating. So if you've ever saved tomato seeds and they've rotted on you on your paper towel, it's likely because that coating is still in place. Kind of the rule of thumb is if the seed is wet or it's coming from a wet environment, then you do need to ferment it. And the process is pretty quick. It's not complicated. And then of course we have our dry seeds. And for the most part, this is easy, right? Whatever plant it is that you're looking at some point, it's going to kind of turn brown and crunchy. And then if I've never saved seed from the plant, I just go and investigate. I look where the seed may be coming from. I snipped off some snapdragons the other day, and the bottom blooms had died off, and I was just going to pull the bottom blooms off, but then I noticed there were seeds flying everywhere. So that's how I learned where the snapdragon seeds come from. A lot of your greens, like lettuce and kale, when it gets really hot out, if you're a gardener, this has happened to you, the plant starts to get really tall and the leaves become bitter. If you let that plant continue to get tall, it's going to put out flowers. The flowers get pollinated, and then it's going to put out these big, they look like little mini beanstalks. It's going to put up a little bunch of beanstalks on it. Those beanstalks will produce the seed. They'll turn yellow and crunchy. You can pull them off, and there'll be a bunch of seeds inside. So every single plant is different on how it produces seed. The one in the photo here, this is actually sage. So sage, when it starts to flower, it puts on these beautiful little purple flowers. Fun fact, you can actually pick those flowers off and suck on the base where it was attached, and it's really sweet. It's a beautiful flavor. If you grow sage, next time it goes to seed or it starts to flower, definitely give it a try. But those flowers will actually turn a very dark color, and you'll find once they completely dry out, there'll be a nice big seed at the base of that flower. So like I said, every plant's different, but the dry seed process is pretty self-explanatory. Make sure the seeds are completely dry. You can pull them off. And then you want to store seeds in a paper product. You don't want to store them in a bag or a jar. If you do put it in a jar or a bag, make sure you add like a silica pack or something, because it's very frustrating when you spend that time to save that seed and dry it out, and then it goes moldy on you. Okay, so we've harvested, we've got our fruit, we've got our seeds. Your garden likely looks not very good at this point, so let's start cleaning up. I will tell you that I am a little bit biased. I practice permaculture. There's typically two types of people. People who like their property really well manicured and beautiful, and then people who really don't care. I fall in the don't care category. So some of the practices that I use and the organization uses may not align with what you like to see, and that's okay. So when we're cleaning up, there's kind of four things we want to think about. Of course, leaves. If you have any trees on your property, or you live on planet Earth where there's wind, you're going to have leaves that fall into your garden. Of course, you can rake those up. You can put them in leaf bags. You can send them to the city, or you can actually just not touch them. What happens is a lot of pollinators and a lot of insects and even some small critters use that leaf litter as a hibernation space throughout the winter. So if you don't really care that much about how your property looks, you could consider leaving leaves, or you can meet in the middle. You can take those leaves and you can place them on your garden. It's going to help insulate your garden. Those leaves will break down a little bit over the winter and put some nutrients into your garden. And then of course the insects and the pollinators and maybe some little critters can use those as hibernation. Of course, if we're leaving our leaves, we want to make sure we're leaving them until May, because a lot of those critters don't emerge until late April, early May. I was actually cleaning up my lavender this past April, and I watched a little bumblebee crawl out from the leaves. I'd never really witnessed it before, but it was really that moment where I thought, okay, these got to stay. I will note, if you were here earlier today, if you have black walnut trees in the nearby area or in your yard, do not place the leaves on your garden. They do contain a toxin that will leach into your garden and can affect your plants. So avoid anything black walnut related. So you could consider leaving your leaves. If you grow flowers or you have perennial plants like sage, you're going to want to consider pruning them or even wrapping them up. We grow figs here at home, and we have to wrap them and insulate them really well because they just don't grow well in our climate. Not all plants like to be pruned in the fall, though. I highly suggest consulting whatever information guide came with the plant. You can do some research, you can chat with someone at a garden center, or you can even call us. But some of the plants like to be pruned in early dormancy. So when that first frost comes through and the plant starts to die off and retreats, that's when you can go in and you can prune it. And that includes bee balm, clematis, hollyhock, peonies, yarrow. The list could go on. I couldn't list everything, but consider pruning and wrapping your plants at this time. As you're actually removing the plants from your garden, we want to think about not disturbing the soil as much as possible. So again, if you're a lazy gardener or you practice permaculture, you could leave your plants until the spring. And again, those critters are going to use them, whether it's for food or it's for shelter. You could just leave your plants. If you don't want to leave your plants, that's totally okay. You can go ahead and at the base of the plant where it meets the soil, you can just snip. You can actually leave the roots in the soil. As long as the plant wasn't diseased, those roots will slowly break down within the soil. They will aerate the soil, and then they'll also create pathways further down for water access for the following year. So just snip them right at the base, dispose of the top part, and you can leave the roots there right in the garden. And then the last thing is, can any of your plants come inside? This, of course, is very difficult being in Southern Ontario with our harsh winters, but you can overwinter a lot of herbs if you have a nice sunny window. They may not thrive over the winter, but they'll survive, and then you can plant them out again in the spring. And then you may not know that you can actually overwinter peppers. So you would take those pepper plants, you would put them in your basement, let them die off, let them go dormant, and then you can bring them back out again in the spring. So peppers do really well overwintering, in the house. So if you have a prized pepper plant that you want to continue growing, you can consider planting that pepper or keeping that pepper plant in your basement. So we got the garden cleaned up, we've got everything harvested, we got the seeds harvested. We got to think about getting some nutrients back into that soil for the spring. Of course, you can do this in the spring, but if you're like me and you have the most hectic life, you're going to do anything you can in the fall to alleviate some of that stress. So I like to fertilize if I need it in the fall, and we really encourage all of our garden sites to fertilize in the fall. There's a couple ways that you can do this. Again, EcoGround specifically practices as much as possible organic gardening. We don't use synthetic fertilizers. If you do choose to use a synthetic fertilizer, just understand that it will kill a lot of really great bacteria that's in your soil. So I highly suggest staying away from synthetic fertilizer unless you need it for a very, very specific reason. But a couple of ways you can fertilize your gardens naturally. You can produce your own compost. This is quite easy. I do get a lot of questions about critters. As long as you're turning that compost over regularly and you're burying your food, this isn't usually an issue. You may get a raccoon or two, but nothing crazy. If backyard composting was as dirty as people thought it was, it wouldn't be allowed. So you could consider doing your own compost. You need a little bit of space, water, and time. You want to make sure you're turning it over every week. It's quite easy. You can also purchase big black composters from the city, but I will tell you, I do not like those. I find that they pose a mobility issue. It's very difficult to turn over. So if you have mobility concerns, I don't know if I would go with the black composters. But you can produce your own compost. You can also find a trusted supplier. So every spring, the city makes compost available to residents. It's actually really good quality compost. It's what we use in our community gardens. I really love it, which is saying a lot. So you could consider getting compost from the city. Also, if you're a host gardener with us, which I will talk about at the end, we also make this compost available to you as well through us. If you want to purchase it, we have Black Swallow Living Soils here in town. They make very, very high quality compost, very, very high quality soils. And their goal is to, it's living soil. So it has really, really good organisms in it. You can also go to a local farm. You can pick up mature compost. We want to make sure it's mature, not fresh. You can get mushroom compost from farms. And then, of course, different department stores will also sell compost in a bag. So you can go ahead and you can spread that over your garden. If you don't think that your garden necessarily fully needs some compost, you could consider mulching. So this is what I do at home. I call a local tree removal company, and they drop fresh mulch into my driveway. It does not contain anything black walnut. Again, you want to avoid black walnut. And we'll take that mulch same day and we'll spread it on our garden, and that breaks down over 2 years. It puts nutrients back into the soil. It helps with water retention, so then we don't have to go through every year and add as much compost. Again, the city of Brantford also provides mulch if you want to pick some up from them, and then local farms as well will provide it. You want to avoid anything that's dyed if you're putting mulch on a vegetable garden specifically. And then something you may not be familiar with, you can actually grow a specific plant over the winter that puts nutrients back into your soil. So this is very common practice in agriculture. You'll find that a lot of farmers will sow legumes or rye, radish, turnip, any of the ones listed there. They'll let them grow over the winter, and then they'll mow them down in the spring, wait 2 to 4 weeks, and then they can go ahead and they plant. And these types of, it's called cover crop, and these types of crops actually put nutrients back into the soil. If you want to do this for the first time, I suggest going with a legume variety because it's going to put nitrogen specifically back into your soil. But again, the process is easy. You're going to sow those seeds in late October, early November. You may need to water them a couple times depending on the temperature. I mean, if it's 30 degrees out like it is right now, it's going to need some water. But you can stop watering it once it starts to freeze. And then again, in the spring, you'll mow it 2 to 4 weeks before you want to plant it. And you can just leave, you don't have to remove the scraps. You can leave them right there. And then within 2 to 4 weeks, you can go ahead and plant. You want to make sure, though, it's mowed down before seed heads form. You don't want it going to seed. And you don't necessarily eat this cover crop. It's specifically to put nutrients back into your soil. So this is kind of a really great way if you have concerns about, again, mobility, or you just want to try something new. This will be the first year that I put in cover crop. I haven't personally done it myself, but we're going to test it on a patch of our garden. So again, fertilize in the fall. Spring you will thank fall you, I promise. Okay, let's quickly talk about winter sowing. I wouldn't necessarily say this has to be a fall activity, but I want to put it on your radar because oftentimes when we start talking about starting seeds, sometimes it's a little bit too late. Winter sowing is a great way to get your hands dirty, a great way to passively grow some seeds, and maybe use some of those recycled materials around your house. So we do this late winter, and you can sow it and forget it. So the process involves taking something similar to this, a milk jug, a takeout container that has a clear lid. You're going to put some drainage holes in the bottom, use a knife, use a drill. You're going to cut the jug in half. You're going to sow the seeds, toss some water in there, put the jug lid back on, seal it up with some tape, put it on your patio, and forget about it until spring. The nice thing with this is some seeds require a process called cold stratification. And again, if you get into seed saving, this is a term that will come up a lot. A lot of our native seeds, they need winter mimicked. So we can't go save the seeds in the fall and then expect them to just grow in the spring without having been frozen at some point. So winter sowing allows that seed to experience winter as it would in nature naturally. So again, if you're going to be growing any native plants, things like milkweed, a lot of our native plants, a lot of our pollinator plants as well require that process. So this is a really great way to do it. It's a little bit of a lazy way to produce seeds, though. It does mean that you're going to have to thin them out, and they obviously don't get as tall or as strong as they would if you had done them inside under lights. But again, a really great way to get some seeds produced. And then in early spring, I say check on your garbage plants because essentially this stuff was bound for garbage. In most cases, your seeds are going to be dense. They're going to need to be separated. But this is really fun. This is something to think about now. You can start collecting your milk jugs. You wouldn't necessarily do this process now. You probably do it in January, February. If you really want to try, look at your seed packet. It's going to tell you how long it's going to take for that plant to reach maturity or to to be planted outside, and just work backwards. But this can be really fun and something to think about as you're prepping your winter activities. Propagation or splitting your plants out. So fall is a great time to split a lot of your plants as they go into dormancy. So things like lavender, sage, yarrow, hostas. Once that frost comes through and those plants start to retreat and their foliage dies off, you can go ahead, you can gently divide the roots and you can place them in a new home. That way comes spring, that action's already been done, and now you have a brand new lavender plant. If you're like me and you grow figs or roses or gooseberries. Once those plants go dormant, you can actually snip off a piece of the plant and make sure that there's nodes in them. You can keep them cold over the winter, and then you can root them in the spring in soil. And now you have a new fig tree or a new rose bush or a new gooseberry plant. Again, this process is a little bit more difficult and might require more research depending on what you're planning to propagate, but it's a good time to do it in the fall, right as the plant goes into dormancy. So again, as we're cleaning up your gardens, think about, are there any plants that are getting too big? I know I have not pruned my lavender in 2 or 3 years. It needs to be split desperately. Same with my sage. So that's something I'll be doing in a couple weeks when it's finally cold out and we get a frost. Okay, we're pretty much done outside. We've done our harvesting, we've collected our seeds, and we've kind of cleaned up the gardens to whatever's working best for us. But we still have some actions to do inside, and I would say this is as important, if not more important, than the actions we've done outside. Don't skip this step, guys. You're going to want to evaluate your equipment. If you're a seasoned gardener, you know that there are tools and things that you need to garden, things that you desperately cherish. Maybe it's your pruners, a specific pair of gloves. Let's sit down, let's look at that equipment. The perk to doing this now is everything's on sale. So if you need to replace anything, if you need to replace specific parts, now is the time to do it because you're going to get a really good price. So is anything broken? Do you need to upgrade? Do you need to order more gloves? If you're like me, I mean, I obviously do this full time. I go through gloves like crazy. Are your pruners sharp? Do they need to be sharpened? Make sure you guys are also cleaning all your equipment well with alcohol and you want to store in a dry place. I mean, in fall, if you were cutting down tomato plants that had blight and then you chose not to clean your pruners, you can pass that bacteria to plants in the spring. So you want to make sure you're cleaning everything really well. I know that, I don't know how, but I broke our shovel handle. So I know I need to go pick up a new shovel handle and replace that. My pruners are definitely dull, so we're going to sharpen those up as well. So just take a look at all of your equipment and evaluate your needs. Storage. So we're wanting to make sure that all of our equipment is being stored properly. So anything metal, make sure you're storing it in a dry location. Don't put it into your humid basement. Don't leave it out where it's going to get wet. You're gonna have an issue with rusting. Your plastic pots. If you leave those plastic pots out behind your shed in the snow, the likelihood of them breaking because that plastic has gotten very cold is really likely. So make sure, clean out your pots. Again, especially if there's any sort of disease, you don't want any cross-contamination. Clean them out, dry them, and then put them in a dry, warm location just so that you're preserving that quality. Otherwise, you're going to have to purchase new pots. And then, of course, your seeds, you always want to keep those in a dry, cool location. If you saved any seeds or you had anything left over from when you did seedlings, make sure you're storing those properly. And then store any of your leftover soil out of the rain. I have this terrible habit. Well, I'll open peat moss or I'll open up a bag of Pro Mix and then I won't wrap it up and then it'll rain and the rain will get through the bag. That's a really good way to deplete nutrients in your soil and also cause a mildew issue. So if you take a peek behind your shed, just make sure that there's no soil that's being left out and get that wrapped up and put it somewhere where it's dry. And then this is my favorite part of fall. I actually do my garden planning now. So I will take any of my final thoughts from 2023. I'll put them into my journal. I'll just get everything out of my brain. And then I'll start planning for 2024 while that's still fresh. I also do this because I want to get my seed order in soon. If you like to order locally and maybe you want to order from William Dam, a lot of times the local seed companies need your orders in November in order to process them for late winter. I placed an order with William Dam in like late December, early January last year for some Lysanthius seeds, which are a beautiful, beautiful flower, but they take a really long time to grow, so I needed them in January. February rolled around and I still hadn't received the seeds, so I called William Dam and they said, oh no, we won't be shipping those out until the end of April. You would have needed to order those in the fall. So if you like to order your seeds fresh from your favorite local companies, plan your garden now, figure out what your needs are, and then you can go from there. Okay, so I mean that's kind of it in terms of garden wrap up. You really just want to clean everything up, get your equipment, evaluate your equipment, see what your needs are for the following year, maybe do some planning. Of course, finish off that lovely harvest. If you're like me and you like to can a lot, you're going to be preserving a lot of that. And then the season's kind of done. And this is a great opportunity to get in the house and relax a little bit, maybe focus on the hobby that you've neglected, maybe get some more exercise in. So I kind of like that off season, the November to February, because I actually get to relax and focus on the things that I've neglected in my house. So this is the time to do that, get your gardens wrapped up and then spend more time with your family, do some things in the house. Being indoors is not necessarily the end of the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit real quick about the organization and some of the things that we offer. So as mentioned, we're Equal Ground Community Gardens. We were established in 2009. It was two separate organizations that had started community gardens, and we actually came together and incorporated, and then we partnered with the city in 2015. So we work with the city of Brantford and with Brant County in order to facilitate a lot of our gardens. So we were entirely volunteer run until last October when the organization hired me. I'm actually the only employee. Everything else that happens, all of our gardens are all run by volunteers. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. You guys know how much volunteers are valued. So we're really grateful for everyone who helps keep the organization running. So we work to bring equal gardening and food access to everyone. So we have two of our main programs, all of which you guys are probably interested in. So we have our community gardens, and they're run for the community, by the community. So we don't do plot rentals. Any of our gardens are open to the public at all times. So anyone can go in, they can water, weed, harvest. They're there for anyone to enjoy. You can register as a volunteer, or you can just visit casually. It's entirely up to you what time you have to give, and how involved you want to be in. Every garden kind of operates a little bit differently. Some of them do regular meetups, some of them work independently, some of them actually have a schedule where volunteers can choose how much time they have and they manage the garden chores that way. Some of them are so busy that they don't need that, and it's all just passive work, like Earl Haig, which is the site that I oversee. So we have 30-ish community gardens. Every year it's a little bit different. Most of them are on city or county park locations. So if you're interested in seeing all of our garden locations, we have an interactive map up on our website, and our website will pop up in a second. You guys will see it, but you can visit that map and you can actually see if there's a garden nearby. We also take new garden requests. So if you want to start a community garden, whether you're on a public or you're near a public park, or even if you're a private facility, we'll help you get a garden going. So some of our gardens are at private facilities like Brantwood. We have one at Woodview, and those gardens, they service a very specific community. If you're not really into community gardens, or you want to try gardening at home, we also have our host garden program. So we will actually give you plants, seeds, compost, and support. We'll give that to home gardeners, and then they'll donate 20% of their harvest to their community. So we do take registration for this program in the winter, and you can come and register with us, and we'll provide all that to you in the spring. We also take plant requests as well. And then this hasn't been touched on yet, but if you are up in the news in Brantford, you would have heard about this. We have our Greenhouse and Learning Center, and this will be ready this spring. It's going to be, I'll be there full time. We have a brand new location at Woodman Park, where the community center is, just behind the brand new pool. And we'll be hosting classes and workshops there, and it's open to the public. So you're welcome to come join us anytime. And you can learn gardening skills, or maybe if you're a seasoned gardener, you can pass those skills on to a volunteer that's there. Those are kind of our main three programs, and you're welcome to come get involved anytime. If you are watching this in the future, the information that I'm providing still applies. We have a new project where we are putting together a really well-rounded gardening resource for the community to access. It'll be accessible online, through a podcast, and also we're going to have copies available at the local libraries. So we would like to connect with seasoned gardeners and farmers to see what information they would consider contributing to this resource. So if this may fit you, if you may have something to contribute, whether it's vegetable gardening or it's flower gardening, pretty much anything gardening related in Brantford and Brant County, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love a little bit of your time. So if this applies to you, I'd love for you to get in touch. So this is my contact information. You can reach us by phone, by email. We have a website, and we're also on Facebook and Instagram. So I will let you guys go. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I hope you have a great garden wrap up.
Oh, thank you so